My name is Adelaide Thornton. The last time my father looked me in the eye, he didn't call me his daughter. He called me a disgrace, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. The laughter that followed didn't come from strangers. It came from my own family. And in that moment, I understood. Blood means nothing when respect is denied. The courtroom in Boston was packed, the kind of silence that prickles against your skin. Cameras clicked from the press benches, every lens hungry for scandal. My father rose from his seat like a man taking center stage, his expensive suit tailored to perfection, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to owning every room he entered. He didn't bother with restraint. His words cracked like a whip. I was nothing, an embarrassment, a waste. The smirk on his lips turned into laughter that spread like a stain across the room. It wasn't strangers who joined in. It was blood. My brother leaned back, arms crossed, grinning as if he'd finally won a lifelong game. My mother lowered her gaze, her silence louder than any insult hurled at me. The sound of those chuckles, sharp, careless, echoed off the paneled walls. I stood still, forcing my shoulders not to tremble, my hands clasped tight to keep from betraying even the smallest flinch. The judge tapped the gavel for order, but order had already been broken. And then my father delivered the strike meant to cut deepest. He told the court that I had disappeared for years, leaving my family behind because I couldn't handle responsibility. His voice carried that polished cruelty he wielded so well, and the weight of it pressed the air from my lungs. Whispers spread through the gallery, heads nodding in agreement with him. In that moment, the tide in the room turned fully against me, leaving me on an island of silence, surrounded by the ridicule of my own kin. At 18, I walked out of that house with a second-hand duffel bag slung over my shoulder. My father's voice followed me down the driveway, sharp as glass. "Don't come back when you fail." Those words carved themselves into my spine, and for years they carried me further than his approval ever could. In uniform, among strangers who became brothers and sisters, I found the kind of respect I'd never known under his roof. I trained men who stood taller when I barked a command, and I buried my doubts in the grit of long nights and punishing drills. But I never told my family what I was doing. Letting them know would have meant giving them power over something I needed to keep mine. Back in the courtroom, the sound of rustling paper snapped me out of memory. My father's attorney held up a folder with theatrical precision. Inside were records claiming I'd been dismissed from service, fabrications dressed up as truth. "She was cast out," the attorney announced, his tone dripping with pity that felt like venom. "Mrs. Thornton is nothing more than someone who ran away and was thrown aside." Gasps swept across the gallery, followed by a low hum of whispers. I could feel the judgment folding over me like a shroud, the room shifting heavily in my father's favor. The lawyer wasn't done. He leaned forward, voice cutting through the murmur. "A daughter who disappears for over a decade has no claim to this family's name, let alone its legacy." My jaw locked so tight it ached. I kept my gaze steady, refusing to give him or my father the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Then, from the back row, a chair scraped against the floor. A man in uniform rose, the insignia on his chest catching the light. He cleared his throat and addressed the judge, asking permission to speak. The name he gave sent a ripple through the press benches. Reporters bent toward one another, whispering urgently. But when the judge nodded for him to continue, he didn't reveal anything more. "I will speak," he said evenly, "when the time is right." And with that, he sat back down, leaving the entire courtroom suspended in uneasy silence. My father's smirk widened, convinced he had already won, while the rest of the room buzzed with restless speculation about what was still to come. The air inside the courtroom grew heavier as the arguments shifted from accusation to spectacle. My father's lawyer stacked photographs and notes across the bench, painting a narrative of my absence, as if every year I spent away was proof that I had abandoned the family. Each snapshot and scribbled timeline was a weapon, designed to convince the room that I'd chosen exile over responsibility. The crowd stirred, reporters scribbling furiously. One headline already whispered aloud: CEO exposes failed daughter. I could feel the words wrapping around me like chains, pulling tighter with every passing second. Then my brother rose, his expression feigning sympathy, though the glint in his eyes betrayed the satisfaction underneath. Maybe my sister should just take a modest settlement and step aside. At least she can keep a shred of dignity. His voice dripped with false concern, but the blade of his words cut clean. My father followed, his tone triumphant, his declaration final. This company will never have room for the useless. His certainty rolled through the chamber, and the murmurs of the gallery echoed in agreement. I stayed silent, my gaze locked on his face. My stillness unsettled a few who watched closely, as if beneath the calm, something dangerous was waiting for its moment to rise. The attorney called their trump card, a man in a pressed suit, introduced as my former superior officer. He raised his hand and swore to the court that I had abandoned my post, that I had been cast out in disgrace. The words thundered against the walls, and the gallery gasped in unison. A ripple of cruel laughter followed, loud and sharp, pressing me toward the edge of humiliation. I studied his face, and memory confirmed what instinct already knew. He had never served a day with me. My lips curved, just barely, into the smallest of smiles. Not amusement, not surrender. Something quieter, a reminder to myself that the truth did not need to rush. Across the aisle, a reporter lifted her camera, catching the flicker of my reaction. She leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Something's off. She knows more than she's letting on." A seed of doubt took root in the sea of certainty, yet the room as a whole swayed firmly toward my father's side. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied, convinced the battle was already over. They mistook my silence for defeat, but that smile, sharp as a blade held in reserve, was the only warning that everything was about to change. The trial pressed forward, and the performance shifted from humiliation to strategy. My father's attorney rose with a polished smile and held up a document thick with signatures and seals. The judge allowed it to be read aloud, an agreement that would grant me a modest sum if I renounced every claim, every share, every inheritance, every right to the family estate. The words hung in the air like a noose. My father leaned back in his chair, lips curled in triumph, convinced I had been cornered at last. He didn't even try to mask his amusement as the paper was set before me. A pen slid across the table. Then came the blow I hadn't expected. My mother, voice trembling but resolute, whispered, "Sign it. Adelaide, don't make this harder than it has to be." The sting of betrayal burned hotter than any insult from my father. My brother couldn't resist adding his own cut, his voice deliberately loud enough for the gallery. "You've stayed silent long enough. It's time you accepted reality." The judge's gavel tapped once for order. All eyes fell on me. I picked up the pen, my hand steady, and for a heartbeat, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Then I placed it back on the table without writing a word and raised my gaze to my father. He laughed, sharp and mocking, his voice booming, "You'll never change. Stubborn and worthless." The crowd erupted, the gallery buzzing with cruel delight. To them, I had just thrown away my last chance. The atmosphere tightened to breaking point. In the eyes of everyone present, I had lost. The whispers grew, the judgment palpable. Then, from the hallway, came the sound, measured, unyielding, the crisp strike of military boots against polished wood. The courtroom turned as one. A colonel in full dress uniform stepped through the doors, the ribbons on his chest glinting beneath the lights. His presence alone shifted the air, the kind of authority that needed no introduction. Cameras flashed furiously, reporters leaning forward, whispering his name in disbelief. The hum of voices swelled into a storm until the judge demanded silence. He requested permission to speak. My father scoffed, his laughter dripping with disdain. "And what does the military have to do with this family matter?" The colonel ignored him, his eyes fixed on me, posture rigid, voice carrying across the room like a command. This woman is not worthless. This woman, Adelaide Thornton, is the one who trains the seals. The chamber fell into stunned silence. A chair clattered as a reporter stumbled back, cameras rattling to life, recording every stunned expression. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father's face drained of color, his lips parting, but no sound coming out. In that moment, the balance of the trial shifted forever. For a heartbeat, the courtroom was carved into silence. Every whisper died, every shuffle of paper stilled. Only a few hushed voices broke through. Disbelieving, "She trains the seals!" The words drifted like sparks through dry grass, catching on ears that widened, eyes that refused to blink. My father's mask cracked. His composure, so carefully tailored to match his suit, faltered as his lips trembled. This can't be true," he stammered. The same man who moments before had boomed his certainty like gospel, now shrinking under the weight of doubt. I did not move toward him. I did not need to. I stood rooted in my place, my voice cutting through the heavy air, steady as steel. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned. The words struck harder than any rebuttal, not shouted, not embellished, but delivered with the calm of someone who had carried them for decades. My father recoiled as though they had drawn blood. And then, a sound that froze the room. The synchronized motion of boots on marble. From the back of the chamber, a small group of men rose. They wore the quiet authority of those trained to move unseen. Yet when they stood, the entire court felt their presence. Navy SEALs, faces hardened by service, eyes unwavering, lifted their hands in a crisp salute directed at me. Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashing wildly. The gavel banged for order, but even the judge couldn't drown out the sheer gravity of the gesture. My father's breath hitched, his knuckles white around the edge of the table, as though gripping it could keep him upright. The contrast between us was almost cruel in its clarity. Him in his $1,000 suit, the sweat beading at his temples, the tremor in his voice. Me in a plain dark suit, shoulders squared, head high, steadier than I had ever been in his presence. I met his eyes and held them, refusing to look away. For the first time, he did. He looked down, breaking the stare, his authority draining like sand through his fingers. The room that once mocked me now leaned toward me, as though the tide itself had shifted. The colonel's words still hung in the air, undeniable. The salute of the SEALs sealed it. My father had built his empire on money and intimidation, but in this space, where respect mattered more than wealth, his power evaporated. The silence that followed was different from the one before. This was not the silence of scorn or ridicule. This was the silence of recognition, and it was mine. The judge's gavel struck like a hammer against stone, a sound that cut through the chaos in the room. "Order!" he commanded, his voice resonant, carrying the weight of finality. The tension had been building all afternoon, a storm gathering above us, and now it was about to break. The colonel's declaration still echoed in every corner of the courtroom, but the judge was not one to rely on words alone. "Clerks," he said firmly, "retrieve the records." His command was met with swift footsteps. Within minutes, sealed folders were brought in, stamped with insignias that carried more authority than any fortune ever could. The judge opened the files slowly, deliberately. The rustle of thick paper sounded louder than the murmurs from the gallery. Every page he turned revealed details that could not be disputed. My years of service, my assignments, my clearance levels, the very training programs I had overseen. The titles leapt from the documents like a verdict: instructor, specialist, tactical advisor, and stamped at the bottom of each report, the unmistakable insignia of the Navy. When he finally looked up, his gaze landed squarely on my father's attorney. "These records are authentic. They confirm every detail Colonel Winters has testified to." His tone cut like a blade. "This court finds no credibility in the claims previously presented." The attorney's face flushed, his carefully rehearsed confidence unraveling into panic. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You may not," The judge interrupted, slamming the gavel once more. The sound reverberated like a gunshot, silencing any protest. The so-called witness, the man who had strutted in with fabricated tales of being my superior, was called back. He hesitated, his shoulders stiff, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. Under questioning, his lies fell apart almost immediately. Dates didn't align, names he cited didn't exist, and the jargon he used was sloppy, exposing him as someone who had never worn a uniform, let alone commanded troops. "Answer directly," the judge demanded. The man's mouth worked soundlessly, sweat pooling at his temples. A bailiff stepped forward. Within moments, the judge had dismissed him entirely, his testimony stricken from the record. The witness was escorted out in disgrace. His shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding the cameras that followed his every step. And then the final blow. The stack of documents my father had paraded earlier, emails, reports, so-called evaluations, were examined line by line. The signatures didn't match. The formatting was inconsistent. The seals crudely forged. The forgeries were exposed as the flimsy counterfeits they were. "This court will not tolerate fraudulent evidence," the judge declared, his voice ringing with authority. "All charges and accusations against Ms. Thornton are hereby dismissed." The gallery erupted. Some gasped. Others whispered furiously to their neighbors. But the cameras didn't swing to me. They turned, almost as one, to my father. Reporters surged forward, flashes illuminating his face, capturing every detail of his downfall. He sat rigid, pale as marble, his jaw clenched, his hand gripping the arm of his chair as though the wood could anchor him to dignity. But there was no dignity left to hold on to. His empire, built on intimidation, manipulation, and wealth, had just been stripped bare. In that moment, he wasn't a CEO, not a patriarch, not even the man who had mocked me hours earlier. He was simply a figure caught in the spotlight, revealed for what he truly was. Small, fragile, and powerless. Beside him, my brother shifted uncomfortably. The smug grin he had worn so confidently earlier was gone. He leaned toward the attorney, whispered something sharp, then slid out of his chair. He gathered his things quickly, his shoulders hunched, as though he could fold himself out of the story. Without a glance back, he slunk toward the exit, unwilling to share the glare of the cameras with a father brought low. My mother stayed. She pressed both hands to her face, her shoulders trembling as sobs finally broke free. She didn't look at me, nor did she reach for my father. Her grief wasn't for truth or justice. It was for the ruin of the image she had clung to all these years. She mourned the collapse of the illusion, not the reality that had crushed me for decades. And I didn't move. I sat in silence, my hands folded in my lap, my expression unchanged. No smile, no tears, no grand display for the press. I didn't need to shout my triumph. I didn't need to rub salt in wounds that were already bleeding. The truth itself was enough. The cameras eventually swung back to me, but I refused to meet them. I wasn't there for their headlines. I was there for something much older, something far heavier. The respect I had carried in secret all my life, now brought into the open. Then came the final cut, the twist that hollowed the room into silence. A reporter pushed through the crowd, microphone raised. "Mr. Thornton," she called, her voice clear. "Do you have anything to say about your daughter now?" The courtroom froze. The question hung in the air like a guillotine. Every head turned toward him, every camera trained on his face. For the first time in my life, my father had no words. His mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes flickered down to the table. Away from me. Away from the world. He lowered his head, shoulders sagging, the weight of silence crushing him more than any sentence could. And in that silence, deafening, absolute, his empire collapsed. Not with fury, not with fire, but with the simple, unshakable truth that he had nothing left to say. The trial was over, yet the chamber still pulsed with restless whispers and the frantic clicking of cameras. I rose from my seat, my movements unhurried, the air around me charged with a quiet finality. Every step toward the exit felt deliberate, the heavy tension lifting as though the walls themselves acknowledged the shift in power. Before I could reach the doors, Colonel Winters stepped forward. He halted in front of me, his presence commanding yet reverent, and offered a solemn salute. His head bowed, his gesture sharp and unmistakable. The gallery froze. For a heartbeat, the room was hushed, breathless. Then, as if carried by an unseen current, people began to rise, first a handful, then more, until a wave of silent respect filled the chamber. A reporter broke the stillness. "Do you have anything to say to your father?" I turned slightly, let a faint smile touch my lips, and answered, steady and calm. No words, only silence. And then I walked out, not with riches or applause, but with something untouchable, dignity, truth, and the respect no amount of money could ever buy.